Now that we've moved on to care, I'd like to first of all present a transition to care. It was interesting to note that at least one teacher was using in real time the robotsandyou feed in an English class while they were studying sci-fi lit, science fiction literature. So I saw some students actually submitting to the list as part of their assignments. So I saw, hashtag extra credit, hashtag Miss Rodham, so posting some questions. So one of those was, here it is, extra credit. One of those is from Laura Bryn Barnhill, and she says, the thought of a robot that drives your car for you could be good. For instance, prevent drunk driving. Okay, so taking away some of the frailties of overcoming some of the frailties of human drivers. But that's just a pivot that I wanted to use to move into care more explicitly. So a satellite talk of this conference was given on Tuesday by Matthias Scheutz and Hans-Arthur Marciske, if I pronounced that correctly, covered that for HISA Online, and it generated a lot of activity. So this wasn't on our own site, but in a site parallel to ours. And so one of the, it was published, the story was published in German, and so therefore the comments appropriate enough are in German, and I wanted to include some of the non-English discussion that's been going on about our event. So from today, so here's the German, but Vincent has kindly provided a translation, which I'll read out. Ichthyo Steger says, a device that under the subject, I don't know what the subject is. Sorry, someone else had to, well, something about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, is that about
how goes artificial intelligence? Yeah. A device that operates autonomously can cause significant harm to us, physically and mentally. Such a device may have been created deliberately by other humans without morally good or bad intention. So I'm not sure, but then he goes on, we'll be missing strict standards pretty quickly with that kind of thing. May one resist a care robot that pretends to know what is good for grandpa? So there are some other comments about care here as well that I want to include. I think life should still have its bright and dark sides to remain life. Is it always a good decision to replace a lost arm or leg with a real-life one? I think we humans become weaker as we trust more in other technologies and not in ourselves. Well, again, not necessarily specifically about cognitive systems, prostheses, but you could see that this kind of question would come up with a cognitive systems twist. And another more explicit one about care, one reason why many people may dislike this idea is that patients need and expect a care that would not only handle their physical needs, but also their emotional ones, caring about them as human beings with their fears, etc. Otherwise would be like a robot. And I think this relates to some of the things Matthias talked about in his satellite talk about unidirectional bonds, which he's worked on before. But with those comments in place, I'd like to see, first from the panel and then from the general membership. So Sunny, go ahead.
From the care side, so I have just a little experience of this because my grandmother had Alzheimer's before she died, and like many Alzheimer's patients, was very hostile to her carer before she died. And so I think actually not only potentially, if we could make them sufficiently effective, with an A, effective, could robot carers address some emotional issues as well as physical issues. Not only that, but they're not going to get offended when they're called every name. And it's not a trivial thing. I mean, it's very hard to be a carer. I mean, even just as a granddaughter who's flying in from somewhere else and is only there for a few days and isn't being recognized, and suddenly she's paranoid, and why can't you take me away from here? It's a horrible situation, and to be somewhere where you can be as brutal as you want to your carer, and they're not going to go away, they're not going to judge you, they're not going to get angry at you. I think that's another person who's not being harmed by you as the cared for, if you see what I mean, because being I think carers have a very rough time. Sorry.
Alan Winfield. This is partly in response to Madeline on this very same issue. A few months ago, I attended a series of kind of workshops of care workers who work in elder care homes for, in fact, precisely for elderly people with dementia. And it was a kind of focus group on robotics, and I and the other people in the room were astonished at how open and welcoming I forgot to say the first thing, the amount of human contact time on average that the people in those elder care homes they were working in, that was not just related to feeding and so on, was 2 minutes a day, 2 minutes. But the point I wanted to make is that the care workers, when they saw the simple kind of pet-like robots that are already available, they wanted them immediately, absolutely immediately. And I was really surprised, but kind of in a good way, at how much of a pull there clearly was from the very people who work right at the very tough kind of coalface of that kind of care.
Thank you. I would just like to add, I mean, these kinds of issues and the issue, for instance, the receptibility in that case, or what Madeline was talking about concerning wanting, would you rather have a human or a machine wiping your bottom? Then that just raises an issue that, as far as I can tell, hasn't been discussed much at this meeting, which is the cultural relativity of all these matters. So the anecdote I've heard, maybe I heard it from Blay, I'm not sure, but was that the story I've heard is that in particular the Japanese are very interested in domestic robots and elderly care for precisely that reason, but just move it from wiping your bottom to basically everything else. They don't want to be a burden on, supposedly, this is a story I've heard, I don't know, I don't have any facts to back it up, but you could imagine a culture that would feel this way, whether or not it's true, the Japanese in particular. But where the attitude is, I don't want to be a burden on anyone, so please give me a non-human caregiver so that I can to make them feel more comfortable about what care they're getting. So that may be shared by people in different European countries or different cultural subgroups within Europe. But that just raises the question when we talk about these social impact, or we talk about ethical issues, or any of this design to fit culture, we have to take into account that there's a wide variety of cultures in Europe, and therefore there won't be any one answer necessarily to any of these questions.
Yeah,
Come in here.
Steve Torrance. I just wanted to, the thought occurs to me, in discussions recently about what you might like to have a robot do. One of the examples that came up was robot midwives. So I thought I might, in conjunction with the question about robot bottom wipers, I thought I'd ask people, would they prefer to have their baby delivered from them by a robot midwife or
can I jump in
midwife?
right there? I had a horrific experience with the NHS and with the midwives, and would have welcomed a machine that was competent as opposed to people who were not. Absolutely, positively. So many things went wrong because they were not following what was going on, and we're desperate for midwives, I happen to know. I mean, there's just a massive shortage of midwives. So, yes, please.
Christophe, did you want to jump in?
Yes, it's nothing to do with what you were talking, but about the questions, the vision, the hostility we can have, or people can have about care or assistive robotics for people. In our experience, we've been making lots of experiments with quadriplegic people, almost 100 quadriplegic people in France, and compare for mobile manipulation and in rehabilitation centers, and we also get under medical control, try to get the feedback from physicians, caregivers, and patients most frequently generally are very in favor of usage of these assistive technologies. There is more reluctancies from caregivers, especially caregivers, not necessarily from physicians, but especially from caregivers. But the hostility, in my opinion, comes from the fact that the machine are still offer very low services. This is one of the reasons, and this is second reason is that they might fear that it could take their job off. And so, as long as the machine doesn't provide services, they do not see really the advantage of using a machine like that in their services or in rehabilitation center. It's more a burden for them than an assistance.
Yeah, before we leave care, can I
Yes, okay.
raise something? I mean, I'm all for cognitive systems in caring applications. Ethically, it's wonderful. I just have one little worry. And I want to address this particularly at Christophe and Andrea, but I'd be very interested in Madeline's views. And it's quite simply this. It's not science fiction. 21 years ago, there was a software-induced disaster in the care sector in London. 20 people died. I'm talking about the London ambulance computer direction system. At least 20 people died. The health service manager involved had to resign, but not one person from the software company, I'll name it, in fact, it was Geobase, faced any sort of punishment. In fact, I've never, outside the military, so I'll let Paul off on this one, I've never outside the military heard of a programmer or their manager being prosecuted or jailed for defective work. And presumably, all those people are now still working in the IT industry. They won't put Geobase on their CV. In fact, they may be in this room. There seems to be no liability at all. And I'd like to hear that we actually have cleared up this legal lacuna because, I mean, and coming back to Madeline, she said quite clearly that if you are the chief executive of a care company and something goes wrong, you will face jail. So if she's in the position that she employs some technology, George's wonderful wheelchair, and you read like every software agreement I've ever read, we guarantee nothing. I mean, do you read what Apple sends you? Before you click on the next version of iTunes? It says, we guarantee nothing. If it doesn't work, if it ruins all your other software, you've got no claim against us. And as I say, I've never heard of a successful prosecution. So if I were the chief executive of a care organisation, I would be very, very hesitant to use this stuff because any legal responsibility for a software-induced disaster would come down to me. And I think for this technology to go forward, that needs to be fixed, doesn't it? But maybe you can show me that if the London Ambulance Service happened today, that the software, the company, the programmers and their managers would face prosecution. As I say, outside the military, which has its own rules, I have never heard of a programmer being jailed for bad work.